Welcome back to the Retire with Confidence podcast. I am thrilled to have Kathy Stokes here with us. She is the Director of Fraud Prevention Programs at AARP. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you, Dave. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, so you and I got to meet a couple weeks ago, and we had a fantastic conversation. And you've had a lot of positions in the past and wound up with AARP and what is, I think, a fantastic program. So before we dive into the program itself, I'd love if you can share with us what brought you to AARP and then what you're doing now with AARP.
I was just talking about this with someone very recently and realized that I have this narrative about how I got to AARP and why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it's not really a narrative. I fit a narrative, let's say,
Okay.
because I started out at the beginning of my career really passionate about public policy. And I pursued that for a while. Ended up getting involved in employee benefits policy when we were moving from defined benefit to defined contribution plans, and all of that chaos was happening, and trying to help employees understand the value of what they had and how to make use of it. And then I was just so fascinated by pension policy that I went to school at night 10 years after college to Johns Hopkins and got my master's in American government and wrote my thesis on retirement income policy in the 21st century. This was back in 97. So it was very prescient, of course.
Yes.
And then before I even finished that degree, I ended up, I got hired by Ernst & Young, now EY, right? To be part of a large national program where we went out and created and then put together employee education programs for our big audit clients, big tax clients, to help their employees understand the value of the retirement benefits they have. So I went from big tower, white tower policy down to on the ground, educating people about how to save for retirement using their employer. And at some point in that journey, I was like, I'm not working for the man anymore. I'm going to go out on my own. And I did for 10 years. I did communication consulting, and I had Ernst & Young was one of my clients. And then I ended up having AARP as a client. And I did a weird 6-month skit with Walt Disney World where I actually had to go to Florida 3 days a week or 4 days a week or something like that. But most of it was virtual. And a lot of it was around still around retirement, but it was writing, so it was writing blogs or writing papers or writing content for employers trying to talk to employees. And the long and short of it is, as I hit my 9th or 10th year, still planning to do this, I got sick and I needed healthcare coverage. And AARP was a client, they had a position open, and I took it, and it wasn't this position. I was going to continue doing retirement education. And I can tell you, honestly, I thought it was the most boring job I ever had in my life. And I couldn't believe I was back working for an employer, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then an opportunity kind of landed on my plate. And I did a little bit of writing on fraud because AARP did have fraud work back there. We're talking 2018. And the organization had decided to sort of take a whole different approach to how they were dealing with the fraud issue. And my boss happened to be a very big part of that. And so she brought me in as the interim director of our new Fraud Watch Network. And I was fortunate enough to hang on that second year and become director officially. And here we are in 2023, and we've done a ton, I think, of good to educate, to help people understand the risk faced because of fraud. We do a lot of victim support work, and we're working at sort of more at the public policy area now. We're not doing enough. Fraud is as an epidemic, and as a society, we need to be doing more. And so I get the opportunity to look at that, talk about it, proselytize about it, and try to make change.
Awesome. So in terms of things like public policy, what specifically are is AARP trying to get implemented? Because I know you talk a lot about the educational aspect of what's needed just to educate the general public. And we could talk about that as well, but specifically on public policy, what is there that needs to be changed really quickly?
So the biggest gap we have, I believe, is that we don't treat fraud as a crime, right? So if you experienced a fraud and weren't too terribly embarrassed or ashamed, and you called the police would say either, well, you gave them your money. It's not,
Yeah.
that's not a crime. Or, well, they're all overseas, so we can't get them anyway. Excuse me. And that's not, that doesn't serve any purpose other than to deprioritize it and make people feel even worse and like that it's their fault.
Yeah.
So we need a whole new approach from a law enforcement perspective. And so we have this concept called the National Elder Fraud Coordination Center.
Okay.
And it would be like, have you heard of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children?
Yes.
Think about that as a fusion center of data and a bunch of really smart data analysts who can bring in those fraud reports in real time, elder fraud, because this is where the big numbers are.
Yeah.
And tie cases together, because these aren't just single events and then someone's off to the next scam.
Right.
Take a look at the grandparent scam where an elderly person gets a call at 2:00 in the morning. It's the grandson, he's in trouble, she needs to send him money, send money right away. That same MO is happening 100 times over all around the country. Because we're not looking at it as organized crime, which it really is, we're not chasing those cases. But if we had analysts with that data pulling it all together and creating investigative packages and handing them off to the Department of Justice, who then would say, all right, this is for FBI, or this is for Secret Service, or this is for Homeland Security, or whomever, they would have investigation already like at step 10. And they could start going after the bad guys on the ground here. Because even though all of this is happening these days transnationally, you've got criminal kingpins in Canada, for goodness sake, Nigeria, Costa Rica, India, China, Cambodia. And we may not be able to go after those people there because of extradition and, sometimes complicitness with the governments and stuff. But they have a lot of people on the ground here. And if we disrupt the business model by putting these guys in jail, it's going to get harder and harder for these criminal gangs to continue doing what they're doing, and they'll go find something else to do.
And is it fair to say that really differs by local police office? So some you might call and they know exactly what to do and who to hand this off, and others might say, not our thing. Why are you calling us? We can't do anything. You already sent out the money. So it's going to differ by which law enforcement you wind up getting in contact with.
And I'm really glad you mentioned that. I'm on an advisory council to something called the International Association of Financial Crimes Investigators. And these are professionals, whether they're detectives in local law enforcement, state police, they could be U.S. Marshals, they could be FBI, some prosecutors are in there, and then a heck of a lot of fraud investigators that work in the private sector, like retail fraud and bank fraud and all that stuff. The people that get it really get it, right? And they want to do the right thing, and they want to go after the bad guys and put them in jail. But there are so few people in law enforcement that know about the crisis and know what to do when somebody calls. And that's no fault of an individual officer or detective.
No.
It's because as a society, as a system, it is not a priority.
They're used to theft and violent crime and all those sorts of things. They're not used to somebody who got called on the phone or on an email and had some money taken from them, essentially.
Yeah,
they're not used to it.
Yeah, and the cases, you have to have specific skill sets to investigate financial crimes, especially these days. A lot of it's happening with crypto. Yeah. And it's hard enough to understand what crypto is when you're when you're just sort of a layperson. Imagine being a detective and they're saying, well, you've got to investigate the blockchain to blah blah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so I get it, but it's time that we as a society get it, that this
Hmm.
is um, it's a public health crisis. People are
Sure.
dying.
Sure.
People
And
are people are being left completely penniless, and their
yeah.
families are blaming him, what's in an older adult, because they don't understand that the criminals are really good at what they do. They just think that mom did something stupid, and we got
Yeah.
to change that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the victims a little bit, or maybe talk about them a lot, because we're focused more on the elder fraud. But as you've said many times when we've talked, it's not only the elderly that are victims of these fraud cases. We'll talk a little bit about the demographics and how this happened. What are some of the common things that you're seeing that these criminals are doing or using. So I guess first let's talk about the victims themselves, and then some of the things that the criminals are doing that we
Yeah.
can make people aware of.
So we don't have good data on fraud because of its underreporting and
Mm,
people not calling the police and whatnot.
yeah.
But there are enough reports to know that it's risen meteorically over the last 5 years or so. So you look at the Agency of Record, Federal Trade Commission pulls all this data in every year,
Hmm.
and they have really cool. It's called a Tableau online, and you can
Yeah.
look at the data. Um, uh, when 2019, right, the year prior to us all shutting down for a while,
Yeah.
the reports in to the FTC suggested that fraud losses were at $2.4 billion that year, which is like, oh my God, 2.4 billion.
Hmm.
Well, skip ahead and look at 2022. That number is now 9 billion.
Mm, wow.
And you look at that 9 billion and recent FTC analysis that says, honestly, we think that only about 2% of people who experience a loss of $1,000 or less report.
Mm,
And we think that maybe only 6% of people who've lost more than $1,000 report. So imagine that 9 billion. I can't do that math, but
yeah.
anytime
That's a
close.
lot.
It's a lot,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
It's a lot, and it's happening to all demographics. And some the scams are sometimes the same, but quite often you'll see that a younger adult will experience an employment scam, trying to get a job.
Mm,
Everything's online. We got used to like interviewing online and doing all this, and then there's all these scammers out there trying to make you believe that they're Amazon and they're hiring,
mm,
and you have to, share sensitive information, social security number, whatever, and all of a sudden ID fraud happens.
wow.
Tech support scam. Younger people who are digital natives just by nature believe everything here, right? Everything on
Hmm.
that phone. And so when they get the pop-up that says it's Microsoft and they have a major virus,
Hmm.
they're not going to question it. They're going to click or they're going to call. But when it's an older person, it could be, I'm your, it's me, Jimmy, and I'm in trouble and I need your help. Or, let's say, I mean, this well, a lot of older people in this country are nowhere near where they need to be financially for retirement. And somebody comes along and says very, very convincingly that you've just won $2 million on a Mercedes Benz with the Publishers Clearinghouse. And they need to believe that, because
Right.
that's going to be their chance to not only make it through retirement, but have generational wealth to pass on. So it depends on the target what the tactic might be. But since we know that younger people experience it and actually report losing losing to fraud, losing money more often than older adults, it can't be because it's just because you're old,
Right.
right? If it's a 23-year-old who's losing money to a tech support scam, it's not because he's experiencing cognitive decline.
Right.
It's not because he's not tech savvy. I mean, all the things that we assume about the victim is very ageist.
Yep.
And because we can just say that's not going to happen to me, it only happens to, the old people who should have known better, but who don't know technology or won't hang up the phone. All of those things are fallacy.
Yeah.
It's fallacy. But we allow ourselves to think that. And we think it'll never happen to us. So we don't do anything about
it. Yep. So when you talk about specifically the elder fraud, and like you said, there's a lot of misconceptions about that. It sounds like they underreport it even more. Maybe there's just a sense of embarrassment there, or maybe they've lost half or all of their life savings, or something awful has happened, and so they're almost too embarrassed to report it.
Yes.
And what happens in those situations? It can't be good, but what can they do, or what?
Yeah.
I guess let's talk about what can they do if something like that happens, but then also what can they do to prevent it, and how can we educate them around that prevention?
Yeah. So ideally, if someone was manipulated into believing that something that wasn't true and money was stolen from them that way, ideally they would be able to contact federal or local law enforcement, and they would, take the report and possibly pursue the investigation. But that doesn't happen today. By and large, that doesn't happen. So the victim has no recourse for financial redress. If it's an older victim, the adult kids immediately are like, "What is wrong with mom? I can't believe she thought that was Jimmy.
Yeah.
Something's going on there?" And so they may not even want to tell their adult kids, because then they're afraid the adult kids are going to, take the keys away, so to speak,
Sure.
but to their financial freedom.
Yeah.
And sometimes when these scams, and more often they end up being like these big investment scams, and the individual loses everything. Not only everything they had to live on, but the generational wealth that was there waiting for their kids and their grandkids. And it creates such rifts in families. We run a victim support program that we created with the Volunteers of America a couple of years ago, and it's a Zoom-based session. You have a facilitator, and then 5 or 6 people, different types of victims, different types of fraud, but all come together, and they always believe it was their fault, and they're so embarrassed and they're so humiliated, and the emotional impact is such. But when they start to hear other people that it happened to, they're like, "Wait a minute. It's not my fault. It wasn't his fault that happened." And just to know that they're not alone is so important. And we hear constantly in those sessions that the families have just been torn apart.
Yeah. So what are some things that you're working to educate individuals on, or how can we educate the general public on, if you get an email or a text link or a phone call saying your grandchild's in jail or something like that, what do we do? What's the educational piece for people out there on this?
Well, one of the things we do know is that if you know about a specific scam, tech support scam, you're 80% less likely to engage with it because you see it coming, right? And if you do engage with it, you're 40% less likely to lose money or sensitive information. So that's why education matters. But we do a kind of a terrible job. And a lot of that is because we never think it's going to happen to us, so we don't engage in the content. So at AARP, our approach is getting as much information as we can out there. Facebook Lives, we have the AARP.org Fraud Watch Network page. We do in-person community events. We do webinars and teletown halls, and all these great things. We try to show up everywhere anybody can be. But if you don't think it's ever going to happen to you, you're just not going to pay attention to it. But if we're all talking to each other, and Dave, you get off today and go, "Oh, actually, I didn't know about the tech support scam, but now I do."
Yep.
And you go and you talk to your colleagues around the water cooler, and the conversation happens, and that awareness builds, and it essentially inoculates us from the scams that we know. So it's important to stay aware. It's important to share what we know. And it's important that we change this social narrative and understand that it is not the fault of the victim. These are transnational criminal organized organized crime, and they've got money, and they've got employees, and they've got scripts. And if one script isn't working, they flip it and they have another script.
Sure. Sure. And so when people recognize, hey, I know I've heard this scam before. Next step, just disengage altogether.
Disengage.
Like, don't even bother trying to mess with them or have fun with them or do anything like that. Just totally disengage.
So
get off the phone.
For all of you listeners who like to mess with the scammers when you know it's a scammer,
yeah.
I'm here to tell you that is a bad idea.
Okay.
And it's because if that's a phone call and you're like, oh, I'm just going to mess with them for a while, so maybe he doesn't have that time to call somebody else, right?
Yeah.
They're watching the metrics, and your phone number, you pick it up and you talk for more than a couple of seconds, it's a little bit more attractive. If you talk for a couple of minutes, your number is hot and it's getting bought and sold across the dark web.
Really?
There are lead lists, yes. Wow. And you're putting yourself on lead lists by messing with these people.
That's interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought the time on the phone would have mattered. I thought maybe they'd take you off the list because you now know better. But it sounds like if you're willing to engage, then you're a possible target for somebody else just because you're willing to talk.
And sadly, if you experienced fraud by being on a phone call, now your number's super valuable and you're going to just get pummeled. There's so much re-victimization, different types of fraud because you're just getting pummeled. Yeah.
So I guess step one is awareness, and step two maybe would be, if this comes across, just just disengage altogether.
So, and that's hard, right? I mean, look, we can't trust our phones because of spoofed caller ID. We can't trust email because, how many of us have gotten the fake Amazon email that there was something wrong with our account?
Oh, yeah.
We cannot trust text. No links in any email or any text. We can't trust social media. We can't trust online ads. So any communication channel we have right now, can't even trust the mail. We're in this horrible situation where we have to be suspicious all the time. And that is not how we are set to be as humans, right? Yeah. And I don't want people to feel like they have to be on their guard all the time and, be afraid and not engage. Knowledge is power. You know about it, you're going to avoid it. You share it, even more so, you're going to inoculate your family, your friends. But we also have to understand that the criminal just isn't good at, making a link look legitimate. The criminal knows that to get you to believe that fake email or that fake text or that fake phone call, they need to get you into a heightened emotional state. And so we kind of figure that the most common elements of most scams are three, right? Contact out of the blue, immediately put you into a heightened emotional state, fear, anxiety, excitement. I just won Publishers Clearinghouse.
Yeah.
And it contains urgency. Got to act now. If we can come up with a way to package those three elements to tell people if these come together, that equals scam, and either disengage or don't engage to begin with, that might be a pretty good campaign.
Absolutely.
Do you remember when you were in second grade in elementary school and learned what to do if your pants caught on fire?
Stop, drop, and roll.
Yeah,
that's right.
Drop and roll for fraud.
That's right. That's good. You just haven't quite come up with a 3-word phrase yet. No,
so I'm going to be working on that in 2024.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah. So the more education,
and when we figure it out, have me back on, and
we'll do.
We can share it with your audience.
Absolutely. So you got the educational piece, and then, like you said, if somebody has engaged and they've been a victim, that's where you're really working on the public policy piece to say, we need to be going after these guys. Like you said, maybe not the organizers, but if you catch the bad actors downstream that are sitting right here among us, that's going to go a long way.
It will, because they're using the same sets of people all over the country. And, really sadly, and I think this is really scary, your traditional street gang is now getting involved in financial crimes. It's safer.
Yeah, harder to catch them.
if you get busted, it's a slap on the wrist and you're back out the next day. We've got
Wow.
to change that. If you actually do time, that's one less person that you can rely on. And
Hmm.
think of that if you like the multiplier of just going after en masse.
Yeah. So you're
Getting
saying
people.
gangs that used to be more focused on like local robberies or even maybe drug deals, all that stuff, they're
Drug
saying, "Hey,
deals,
forget
same with
that stuff. We're going to defraud because it's easier."
yeah. Have you heard about what's been going on with mail theft?
I have not.
So this is a big thing that a lot of your traditional street gang people are involved in. Breaking into the blue boxes, the postal
Hmm.
boxes, or stealing outgoing or incoming mail from personal mailboxes,
Hmm.
or attacking the mail carrier and grabbing what's called the arrow key that opens more than just one box,
Hmm.
going through the mail, pulling out the checks, taking the checks back and putting them in a solvent like acetone, like nail polish remover,
Hmm.
takes everything off of it except they protect the signature.
Sure.
They write that check out to
Jeez.
anyone and at any amount of money. Again, they have somebody that they're paying to go in and deposit it or cash it or whatever,
Hmm.
or sell it on the dark web for other people to do.
Hmm.
And this is up. I think I was just looking at data the other day. When this happens, the bank's generally responsible for the
Okay.
loss,
Okay.
unless you don't let them know within 30 days, and then it's on you. So that's a
Sure.
really important reminder there.
Okay.
Um, I think in 2021, there were like, let's say, 350,000 suspicious activity reports by banks to the federal government that said check fraud's happening.
Wow.
2022, it was twice that, like 680,000.
Wow.
And it's just, and again, the criminals know where opportunity is. And so few of us seem to be writing checks that a lot of the financial institutions just kind of laid them aside in terms of
Hmm.
fraud controls.
Yeah.
They're focused on these fraud controls over here. And then, oh, well, let's go back to the checks.
Oh, that's interesting. And am
Yeah,
I remembering correctly that maybe also some folks that used to, like you say, be more involved in like gang activity are now also effectively delivery people? Like if somebody gets scammed and they have to, you know, send money somewhere, they will actually go to the person's house
that's
and
right.
pick it up. And that's
Yeah.
wow.
Think about that. Think about your grandfather or your grandma or your mom opening the door with a box full of cash and handing it off to someone who's supposed to be the courier,
Hmm.
who is, a drug gang member
Yeah.
or carrying a gun.
Yeah.
Yes. And I started hearing about that probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Wow.
And it's continuing.
Yeah. So educate, educate, educate is the message for
Educate,
the day.
educate, but we can't educate our way out of it. We
Okay.
need law enforcement. We need a whole of society solution. We should not be able to set ourselves up a social media account where it's not set as a default for privacy and security.
Hmm.
But right now, you go on any social media platform and you set up your account and you don't know that there are privacy settings, you're open to the world. It should be
Sure.
the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be able to buy a piece of technology that doesn't have antivirus, anti malware, firewall, VPN. I mean, you can't buy a car without anti lock brakes. Why are we allowed to buy technology that could ruin us financially? So
Sure.
these are the kind of things that have to happen around it. We have to stop blaming victims. We have to give empathy and support. But at the end of the day, it's a whole of society response that we really need desperately.
Absolutely. And AARP is really pushing hard to try to help make this happen. And I know you have uh, a hotline that we can use. There's a website. So tell everybody a little bit about that and how to find that. And we'll include that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, Dave, thank you. We have a really great webpage, aarp.org/fraud watch network. We have a dedicated writer who's putting up great content, at least on a weekly basis, sometimes more, depending on what's happening. We have something we call the Fraud Resource Center, which is, I want to say, like 80 different tip sheets: tech support scam, grandparent scam,
Hmm.
Medicare flex card scam. if you hear of a scam and you're not sure what it's all about, you can go there and learn about it. Become the instant knowledgeable person in your community and share the information. You can sign up for watchdog alerts there. You get an email or a text. It's the same content, so you choose. Biweekly. What's the latest tech support scam or what cryptocurrency
Really?
scams? Yeah. And then we have a scam tracking map. You can go and visit it and see what people are reporting. You can even put your zip code in there and see what's happening in your geography. You can report yourself. Not report yourself.
Yeah.
Yourself can report.
Yes.
We have a podcast, and you can get to it there, but it's better to get it off of podcast platform. But
sure.
The Perfect Scam, and what we're doing with that is it's true crime genre, but it's not about how sophisticated and cool and conniving these con artists are. These are predatory criminals, and this is what they leave in their wake. So we talk to the victims and the victims' family members, and we educate through storytelling.
It's fantastic.
On the other side, we have support for victims. The Fraud Watch Network Helpline, you can call. All of this is free to everybody. You don't have to be an AARP member. You don't have to be of a certain age. The helpline is there to help you determine if something is or isn't legitimate, like that Publishers Clearinghouse letter.
Sure.
If you just want to call and say, hey, I got this Microsoft message on my phone and I knew it was a scam, but I wanted you to know so you could tell other people. We share that with the Federal Trade Commission.
Oh, great.
And then if you're a victim or you're a family member of a victim, you're trying to convince a victim that they're in the middle of a scam and they're not believing you. That's the hardest place to be, frankly. We do everything we can to help you. You talk to a live person. We have probably 200 trained fraud fighter volunteers and some staff that take these calls. And we also have a victim support program, the Zoom sessions. And you can learn about that at aarp.org/fraud support.
Awesome. And there's a hotline as well, correct?
That's the helpline. Yeah, so the helpline and the number there. So it's not a hotline because it's not like 24/7.
Gotcha.
We can connect you to the police right away, but it's a helpline. And it's 877-908-3360.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, we'll have all that in the show notes as well. So you don't have to memorize that. We'll have it all out there for you. So, well, Kathy, I very much appreciate you coming on and sharing that with everybody. It's just such tremendously valuable information because it really does start with education. We'll fix the public policy along the way, but first step is just getting out there and educating people, which is why I wanted to have you on here, and I really appreciate you joining us.
Well, I appreciate you, Dave, and for all your listeners out there, whatever you learned today that you didn't know before, talk about it, pass it forward, get home and call mom.
Yep.
We just need to be talking about it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, Kathy.
Thank you, Dave.
Dave, please let us know